Welcome and good evening to the City of Shakopee City Council meeting for March 6, 2018. Item number 1, if we could call the roll, please.
Yes, Mr. Mayor. Councilmember Luce.
Here.
Councilmember Lehman.
Here.
Mayor Mars.
Here.
Councilmember Whiting.
Here.
Councilmember Mokel.
Here.
Thank you. Let's all stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Moving ahead, item number 3, approval of the agenda. Are there any changes, additions, corrections? Mr. Reynolds?
Just one from staff, Mr. Mayor. We will be pulling 4C4, the final plat for Lloyd's addition.
No longer on the agenda.
You will see that in the future.
Okay. Counselor Whiting?
Make a motion to approve the agenda as amended.
Second. I have a motion and a second for the modified agenda. Further discussion? Discussion. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Motion passes. The agenda has been approved. Moving forward to the consent agenda, are there any subtractions, adds? Mr. Reynolds?
Nothing other than 4C4, Mr. Mayor.
All right. Counselor Whiting?
I'll make a motion to approve the consent agenda.
Second.
I have a motion and a second to approve the, modified consent agenda with 4C4 off,
Deleted, actually. It's deleted.
deleted. And no other discussion. Before we vote then, we would read the consent agenda into the public record. Mr. Reynolds?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and members of council. These are the consent agenda items for 5 March of 2018. 4A1 approves the consumption and display license for Dilemma Brewing Company doing business as Shakopee Brew Hall at 124 First Avenue East. 4A2 approves the minutes of the February 20th, 2018 meeting. 4A3 approves the 2018 city work plan and long-term goals for city staff. 4B1 adopts resolution number R2018-024, a resolution of appreciation to retiring firefighter. 4C1 adopts resolution number R2018-017, a request to Metropolitan Council for an additional 6 months to complete the 2040 comp plan. 4C2 adopts resolution number R2018-020, which approves the final plat of Windermere East First Edition. 4C3 adopts resolution number R2018-026, which replaces resolution number 7960 by reflecting a new agreement and date for the annexation of 10 acres of Jackson Township property located at 12495 Marystown Road. 4D1 authorizes the purchase of body-worn cameras and in-car video systems and accepts agreements with G-Tech Incorporated and Prologix ITS. 4E1 adopts resolution number R2018-023, which supports projects to be considered for funding through the State of Minnesota Corridors of Commerce program. 4E2 adopts resolution number R2018-022, which approves plans and orders the advertisement for bids for the 2018 Street Reconstruction Project, CIF, TAC 18, TAC 003. 4E3 adopts resolution number R2018, TAC 008, which accepts work on the 2017 sanitary sewer manhole rehab project and approves final payment.
Thank you, Mr. Reynolds. Consent agenda, motion's been made and second. It's been read into the public record. There is no discussion. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Consent agenda has been approved. Thank you. Item number 5. Now I'd like to call on any resident that would like to come forward and speak on an item not on the agenda. Please come forward, state your name and address for the record, and welcome on an item not on the agenda. Seeing none, we will move forward then. Item number 6, business removed from consent. There was none. Item number 7A, tax increment financing district for Canterbury, and this is a public hearing. Counselor Mokel?
I'll make a motion to open a public hearing.
Second. I have a motion and a second by Counselor Luce. Further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Motion carries. The public hearing is open. We will hear from staff first. Mr. Kursky, welcome.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. We have a presentation. Tom Dunaway from Springstead is here who will go through the proposed tax increment financing plan for Canterbury area. Tonight, all you're going to be doing is basically, if you were to vote, is to approve the maximum allowable TIF in the district. You will see at a later date the actual expenses, so it will not be able to exceed that amount. So based on the numbers provided by the developer and number crunching by Springstead, they have set a maximum amount that would be available for the TIF. You will see a later plan, probably in 30 to 60 days, of the actual development plan. So this just creates the district tonight, makes the funding available. It doesn't commit the city to fund anything, since that will be done in a TIF development agreement. With that, I will introduce Mr. Dunaway, who will go through his slide presentation.
Thank you. Welcome.
Thank you, Michael. Mr. Mayor, members of the City Council. My name is Tom Dunaway. I am a Vice President with Springstead Incorporated. Springstead Incorporated is a public sector advisory firm. We only do work for public sector entities. We only do work for cities, counties, and school districts. We do not do any work for any private development or any private entities. That's kind of our niche, is only representing public entities, and that makes sure that we do not have any conflict of interest in that regard, particularly as it relates to economic development. We only do work for public entities such as the City of Shakopee. So tonight I'm going to go through a presentation that's going to start out, it's for the public hearing for the proposed TIF District Number 18 for the Canterbury Commons Development Project. And for the presentation, I'm going to provide a bit of an overview of what is tax increment financing, just a refresher to give everybody an understanding of what we are talking about in terms of a statutory tool and how it can be used. And then we'll start talking about some of the project specifics as it relates to how the TIF plan was created. And then we'll talk a little bit about how TIF can be used with the acknowledgement that the actual implementation of any use of TIF would be happening at a later date via the entering into a development agreement. So we'll get into that with the next steps. So tonight, again, the purpose tonight is to hold a public hearing to discuss the creation of a tax increment financing district. What this does is it sets the maximum value and the maximum budget authority that the city would have under this TIF district for entering into future obligations if the city so choose. It gives you the authority to enter into future obligations and gives you the authority to use TIF, but it does not obligate you to use TIF by any means. It simply creates budget authority for taking future action at a later date via a development agreement. Again, it doesn't commit funding for anything. That'll be done at a future date. So what is TIF? TIF, to begin with, is a method of capturing future tax base growth resulting from new development. So if new development happens, that new development will generate new property taxes. That property tax can be captured, that incremental growth in the property tax can be captured and used to pay for public improvements related to that development. So the development that happens will still incur property taxes. They'll still pay the full amount of property taxes based on the new value that they create. What happens is a portion of that tax, that future tax revenue that is eligible to be captured by TIF can be captured and redirected to the city to fund certain public improvements. A significant portion of the future taxes that aren't paid or that are paid by that development aren't actually eligible to be captured by TIF. The state captures a significant portion on commercial property, not eligible to be captured. There's a referendum market value based tax. That portion is not eligible to be captured by TIF. So taxing entities that have a referendum market value based tax, which include the city and the school district, will realize future tax revenue growth as a result of this project, because if this development happens and that future property value comes online and there's that future tax revenue, that portion will not get captured by TIF and will be a benefit to each of those taxing entities. Are you guys able to hear me all right? So with TIF, there's a fixed term for the capture, and then the new development at the end of the term of the TIF district gets added to the general tax base. So tax increment financing is defined by state statute the state sets the terms for how we can utilize this. It gets modified over time. And the idea is for it to be a gap financing tool, to solve problems, to make development happen, or allow development to happen that wouldn't otherwise happen by removing barriers to an investment. Depending on the year it's created, there are different compliance requirements. It's used mainly by cities and counties, and it can help provide an incentive for development or help remove barriers to investment. So depending on the type of TIF district, there's certain criteria that need to be in place in order for a project to be eligible. And depending on the type of district, there's a certain term that can be utilized for that type of TIF district. What we are talking about tonight is a redevelopment district. It requires a finding of blight and a concentrated development, and has a term of up to 25 years from the first receipt of increments. So when we talk about TIF terms, we talk about the number of years from first receipt. So technically, a redevelopment district would be 26 years of actual TIF receipt, 25 years from the first. So similarly with the other ones, these are all 15 plus 1, 25 plus 1, and the like. In the past, the city has done housing TIF districts. They've done districts that created low and moderate income housing, and they've also done economic development districts. So what can we use TIF for? The uses of TIF is regulated by statute. We can't just use these tax dollars as future revenue to fund anything we want. There's limited uses based on statute. So we can use TIF to fund public improvements. We can use it to fund land acquisition, public or private land acquisition, soil correction, site preparation and demolition, including grading and some of those costs, relocation, financing fees and capitalized interest and administrative cost. Under site preparation development, we can also use, and public improvements would also include utilities and infrastructure. What's being proposed for this district and the proposed budget that is referenced in the TIF plan specifically limits the use of future TIF dollars for this TIF district for these types of improvements. Public improvements, land acquisition, and in this case, the land acquisition would be for the purchasing of right-of-way of property, purchasing of property for right-of-way purposes, not to reimburse the developer for any land acquisition outside of the acquisition of property for right-of-way. Additionally, we can use TIF for reimbursing financing fees and interest costs as it relates to the funding of the project. One of the important things to remember with tax increment financing is we're talking about a future revenue source. We're talking about revenue that's going to come online over time. It's going to be generated over that 25, 26-year period. But we're talking about improvements that need to be funded today or in the near future. So we have to bridge that timing. We have to bridge the timing from when we fund things now to having that future revenue to be able to repay that. In doing so, either the public or the private entity that is going to be receiving the TIF ultimately is going to have to borrow funds to fund those costs now, because they won't be able to capture that future TIF revenue until the future. So there's going to be interest that would be incurred on that borrowing TIF is eligible to reimburse over time to help offset that cost. And then additionally, the city is able to retain administrative expenses of up to 10% to fund staff time as it relates to the administration of the district and the reporting requirements. So as I mentioned before, certain public improvement costs are eligible. In this case, streets, roads, utilities, bridges, interchanges, parking, sidewalks, and walkways, and soft costs related to any of the above. And specifically for this proposed district, the funding eligible, or the cost eligible for funding are streets and roads, utilities, sidewalks and walkways, and any soft costs related to the development or design of those. Those would be engineering costs related specifically to the design of those improvements. So those are the types of things that would specifically be eligible for reimbursement under the authority that would be granted by this TIF plan. Costs that are not allowed to be funded by state statute include public buildings such as city centers, public safety, public works buildings, culture and recreation such as parks, community centers, and golf courses, and administration beyond 10% of TIF collections. And it's important to remember, as it relates to the culture and recreation, this is the direct funding of those improvements. Improvements associated with or adjacent to those types of developments, such as publicly owned infrastructure, and roads would be eligible under this statute. That does not this portion of the statute does not exclude publicly owned improvements adjacent to those types of uses. In this case, we're talking about potentially funding public improvements that would be directly related to the creation and construction of new housing, retail, commercial type uses. So it would be even further from a concern in this case, but I wanted to point out specifically as it relates to this portion of the statute that public improvements adjacent to those types of amenities or developments would still be eligible for use under TIF, if that was being considered, but it's not in this case. So as I mentioned, TIF is a source of future revenue. It's money that's going to be coming in over time. So how do we fund those costs up front in today's dollars? There's two ways that cities can go about doing that. The first is a pay-as-you-go basis. And what differentiates these two approaches is what side the risk falls on. Who takes the risk that that future TIF revenue is going to be as projected and is going to come in as anticipated? When we talk about a pay-as-you-go TIF, the developer is funding those public improvements up front. They are incurring that cost. They are taking on that risk that that future TIF revenue is going to be coming in as projected. If that TIF revenue is short or comes in at a lesser amount or the development happens to a lesser extent, it's their dollars that will not be reimbursed. They were the ones that came out of pocket, and they're the ones that are bearing the risk of that future development. And that reimbursement is limited to the amount of TIF that's collected. If a developer incurs a certain amount of costs, they have a budget based off of a TIF plan and a development agreement. If that revenue comes in short, the city has no obligation to offset that or make them whole. Conversely, you could issue, under statute, you could potentially issue general obligation tax increment bonds. Tax increment bonds would be repaid by the idea is that they would be repaid by that future TIF revenue. The difference there is when you do that route, you are now putting that risk on the city. The city is on the hook for refunding or repaying that initial borrowing. If the TIF revenue were to come in less, the city would need to make those bonds whole and come out of pocket to make those payments. So when we look at pay-as-you-go versus tax increment bonds, we're talking about who's taking on that risk. In the case of this development, we're proposing that this will be a pay-as-you-go development, that the developer will be taking on all the risk, that the future TIF revenue will come in as projected. We've shifted that risk and that burden to the private side and to the private ledger, and the city does not have any risk or any liability if TIF revenue comes in at a lesser amount.
I have a question on that.
Yeah.
This is the proposals for a pay-as-you-go, so the developer takes out the loan to make these improvements and owns that loan, right?
Yeah, so they have to fund the improvements up front. They can fund it out of pocket, they can borrow money, they can go to a bank with the TIF pay-go note and ask a bank to capitalize that note. There's a couple ways that they can fund that. The city's obligation is only as far as that pay-as-you-go agreement, which says if you build eligible improvements and you documented that you built those eligible improvements and we accept that, then the future revenue will be available to you to be repaid as collected.
And then
How
if
they fund that.
The captured dollars come back to them to pay for that public infrastructure, but you just said that if the development doesn't generate enough dollars, they're responsible for the shortfall, correct?
Yes, correct. They have to, depending on how they capitalize that money up front, if they borrowed it or if they funded it out of pocket, that risk is on them. The city will repay per the terms of the development agreement, whatever percentage that they're obligated to pay the developer based on what's generated, and they don't have to worry about anything beyond that. So the development agreement will say, you get X amount of TIF revenue this year, we'll give you, say, 90% of that to pay down the outstanding balance. If that 90% is $10 or if it's a significantly higher amount, it doesn't matter to the city. The city's only obligated to pay their percentage of what is collected.
Okay. Counselor Lyman?
Two questions. The first one was hypothetical. Could the developer fund it out of pocket, $30 million put in the infrastructure, get reimbursed out of the future taxes from the property over 25 years, and then collect the interest on top of it? So in essence, they would be receiving their investment back plus $40 million in interest. So they're actually getting paid to do this.
Yeah, the pay-as-you-go note would reimburse them for the cost of the principal amount of the improvements, in this case potentially $30 million. It would likely reimburse them for interest expenses, whether or not those are incurred interest due to borrowing or due to loss of private benefit from having invested that money. They can still be eligible to be reimbursed that interest regardless of if it's borrowed money or if it's out of pocket.
Okay, and second question. So for 25 years, the taxes from the improvements on the property go back into paying for the improvements. What funds additional police, fire, street maintenance workers, park maintenance people that the city adds in that 25 years? Does this property contribute to that at all?
It would, to the extent that the base value that is currently there, the base value, the existing level of property taxes that are paid by the development
Today?
would continue to be there and be present, but if there is an increased need for services for development area, ultimately that burden would get spread against the general tax base as a whole. That is,
So they wouldn't be contributing to any additional services?
not via the traditional property tax methods. They might some via the referendum market value. That's a bigger value to the school district because they collect a larger portion of their money via referendum market value.
The city doesn't typically
specifically
put
the
out a
city,
referendum
no.
for a police officer.
What was that?
The city doesn't typically put out a referendum
No,
for a
exactly.
police officer.
Yes, so exactly. So there is a cost to tax increment districts in that providing services, there is not new additional revenue to offset any additional services that might need to be provided.
Counselor Lewis?
You said the current level of taxation stays the same, but now we know taxes generally increase. Do we get that basic increment of increase, or we get nothing other than the line stays flat?
The incremental growth in property taxes, be it inflationary or as a result of new development, does get captured as TIF. It's a mathematical calculation. So that portion that would be inflationary growth does get lost to the TIF district. So it would be flat as non-TIF dollars.
Unless a taxing district increased their tax rate, then they would capture more of that baseline, correct?
Yes, that is a good point. TIF is calculated, so when we adopt a TIF district, we are going to set the TIF eligible tax rate. So it would be set based off of today's tax rate. TIF will be generated based off of the current rate or the frozen rate, which would be the rate that's adopted today. TIF revenue would be generated based off of the lesser of the current rate or the frozen rate. So if property tax rates were to go up from today's dollars based on all the entities, that additional increase in tax rates would generate additional value to the city that would be outside of the TIF district. So TIF would be captured at the current rate, and any growth in tax rate would be beneficial.
Counselor
Not
Lewis?
TIF.
Okay, does the reverse hold water? You know, if we're trying to lower our rates. If we do lower our rates, we're gonna lower our,
Yes, exactly. That's the statute is set, so it's the lesser of the current rate or the frozen rate. So if tax rates go down, and that goes to the risk that the developer is going to be taking on in terms of that future TIF revenue. If tax rates go down, if there's a statutory change and that TIF revenue goes down from what was anticipated, that risk is on the developer's shoulders. So much to that, that same point, if the tax rate goes down and the city does lower their tax rate, they will generate TIF based off the actual rate as opposed to the frozen rate.
Counselor Lehman?
Property value increases on current property that's paying current taxes.
Mhm.
If the value of these properties go up, is the additional taxation captured?
That is captured by the TIF. If there is some inflationary value, increase in value to the land as is, as a result of the TIF district, that does get captured. I don't know if there's really a way, part of it's just mathematical and a mechanical issue in terms of, I don't know how the county would go about trying to differentiate what was inflationary growth versus what was new growth as a result of the development. So it's just generally the increase in market value from today's dollars, the taxes related to that do get captured as TIFs, so.
Counselor Mokel?
Mr. Dunaway, could you explain to us, I believe a couple months ago you explained that at some point it can be paid off faster by the developer. Can you explain that scenario to us?
Yeah, so if TIF revenue comes in at a higher rate, and we'll talk about some of the assumptions that go into the creation of a TIF district. If market values come in at a higher rate and TIF is generated at a faster rate than is projected in the plan, that's gonna generate additional revenue, which will be used to pay down the outstanding balance of that PAYGO note, which can then shrink the term of the TIF district. So one of the things that I'll talk about in a minute as it relates to this TIF district is that the budget for this TIF district assumes no inflationary increment or no inflationary growth in market value. We've assumed the market value will get built out and then it will stay at that value. If that inflationary growth happens, which it's more than likely gonna happen, that property tends to appreciate over time, that's a hedge that's gonna shorten the term of the district. So if it takes 26 years, assuming no inflation, to pay down the PAYGO balance, and inflation happens, that's gonna start eating years off the district and pay this off quicker than anticipated. So it's a very conservative hedge to base the TIF revenue and the budget authority for the TIF district off of 0% inflation. A lot of times we will assume some level of inflation. So that's likely to shorten the term of the district depending on, what actually occurs.
All right. Thank you. Continue. Oh, I'm sorry, Counselor Lewis.
You just said that they can pay it off earlier. In pay-as-you-go, they're paying interest, so it's beneficial to them, but are they obligated to do that?
Well, the city is the one that's collecting the tax revenue, and the city is keeping track of the outstanding balance and the amount of interest that's eligible to be reimbursed. So it's the city's obligation to the developer. So if the developer, funds $33 million or $30 million worth of improvements, the city's gonna be tracking what the outstanding balance of that is and what the interest is on that. So the city is gonna be the one responsible for determining ultimately when that's been satisfied. So the developer can't take a half a payment in 1 year just in order to maximize interest. It's gonna be paid down as increment comes in and calculated by the city.
But I'd like in Counselor Lewis's question, if the projections of value of the increment over time exceed, and city, county collects more money and then gives it to the developer to pay off that note, you'd collect more money and actually pay it down faster, and then under that scenario, eventually you'd extinguish the TIF district, correct?
Yes, exactly. And then to Councilmember Lewis's point too, you also reduce the amount of interest that's incurred on that note, because the shorter period that note is outstanding, the lesser amount of interest that will be incurred against it.
Counselor Whiting.
Thank you. So the 33 million or 30-plus million that's available out of this district, let's say when we do all the bids, or the roads and improvements are 25 million. Is it calculated from the 25 million, or is it might pay off sooner? Or would it be still collecting the same amount to get to that 33 million?
The term of the PAYGO note will be set based off the principal amount. So when the city enters into a development agreement, there will be an estimated amount for the value of that agreement based off the estimated cost for the improvements. And certain improvements in this case will be identified as eligible for reimbursement. If the actual construction cost of those improvements ends up being less, the developer has to document what they incurred as TIF eligible expenses. So they have to come to Darren basically with a stack of receipts saying this is what we spent under these categories that are eligible for TIF reimbursement. And if that's a lesser amount than was anticipated in the PAYGO note based off of construction cost savings, the principal amount of the note will be set based off whatever those receipts are. So we're reimbursing actual cost incurred at the level that they're incurred.
But the time frame might not change.
No, the time frame is dictated based on how quickly the revenue comes in to repay it.
The value.
So if, and that allows them the flexibility, if it was a lesser principal amount, but it took longer for development to come online, they would still be able to get repaid that full amount. It doesn't automatically change the term.
Okay. Thank you. Proceed.
Yeah. All right, so for this case, we're talking about a pay-as-you-go TIF district, and I think we've covered that pretty well. So how was a TIF district created? So we have to have a development district. That was created by the city a significant period ago, and that encompasses a large area of the city. Within a development district, we can create multiple TIF districts. So all of the city's TIF districts are within their existing development districts. So when we create a TIF district, we create a TIF plan that provides a budget authority for entering into future obligation. It defines the geographic boundaries of that TIF district, and it defines the purpose of that TIF district. We have to hold a public hearing, and then following that and following the approval of the TIF district by the city council, we would then request certification to the county, which would allow the county to start the administration process for collecting and creating the TIF district. So this process is all defined by statute. It takes approximately 60 to 90 days to go through this. We have to provide notice to the county and the school board of the TIF plan 30 days prior to this meeting. Oop, sort of jumping ahead here. We have to notice a public hearing. We have to submit that to the paper 10 days, at least 10 days, and no more than 30 days prior to the public hearing. We have to have planning commission review to have them verify that the proposed development conforms to the city's overall plan for development as a whole, and then we have to hold a public hearing, which is what we're doing tonight. All right, so that's a little bit about what TIF is, and now we'll dive a little bit more into the actual specific development. So the TIF plan proposes the redevelopment of portions of the land around the Canterbury site and the build out of the surrounding property. So the development scenario that's being considered, so the future growth that's being anticipated to occur within that area is a mix of future multifamily, hospitality, retail, office, and commercial uses that would be ultimately constructed within the boundaries of the TIF district. So the TIF plan provides the potential to reimburse the developer for eligible TIF reimbursable expenditures associated with that development, specifically the development of public streets, utilities, sidewalks, and other public infrastructure within the TIF district. So we have narrowed the scope of what's eligible to be reimbursed within this version of the TIF plan. So the map here shows all the parcels that it would be proposed to be within the boundaries of the TIF district, are the highlighted ones here. So what qualifies a TIF district to be a redevelopment TIF district? The state statute specifies how we go about qualifying the property, and there's a couple tests that have to be met. The first is that over 70% of the parcels in the TIF district have to be occupied. The legislature doesn't want us to be able to have a lot of vacant space be put in a redevelopment district. They want it to be buildings. So when we talk about 70% of the parcels as being occupied, we're talking about 70% of the parcels having an improvement on them. It doesn't mean that 70% of that parcel has to have improvements on it, but that 70% of the parcels have to have some level of development on them, some level of improvement, be it building, parking lot, those types of things. So in that case, in this case, the proposed district meets that test. The test also requires that more than 50% of the buildings in the TIF district are deemed to be structurally substandard to a degree requiring substantial renovation or clearance. It's important to point out in here, and if you look in the blight study that was prepared by LHB on behalf of the city, there was a couple iterations of that done. It was first done back in 2014, and then it was expanded in 2017 a couple times. It was all done on behalf of the city and at the request of the city. Part 3, in the Part 3 section, I think it's page 6, the second paragraph defines the definition of building, provides the definition of building as per the blight study test. And the buildings in the blight study are defined as buildings that have utilities, electric, sewer, water, and are intended to be inhabited by humans, be it for commercial purposes or residential purposes. So in the case of this district, there are a number of buildings in this area that are conjoined in between by horse stables. So there's buildings on the end that are small dormitory style buildings that have residential units in them, small, very basic and very Spartan residential units that have beds, utilities, bathrooms, and the like. And then they're kind of like two end units on a townhome that have a barn conjoined in between them. The barn stable type buildings are not eligible to be counted as buildings per TIF statute and are not counted for purposes of this test. So when we talk about a number of the buildings on the property and the blight study identifies which of those buildings are, we're talking about specifically buildings that are meant to be inhabited by humans that have utilities, sewer, water, heat, the like, and are not outbuildings. So those buildings have to be defined as structurally substandard. So what structurally substandard is it's not so much blighted as it's no longer code compliant. And that code compliant has to do with changes in in the way buildings are required to be built. So buildings that were built a number of years ago didn't have to have certain standards like ADA standards or certain types of plumbing. You know, it's similar to cars in the 80s didn't have to have airbags, but now all cars today have to have airbags. It's that kind of, that's what we talk about being code deficient, is they're no longer built to today's standards, and it would take more than 15% of the cost of constructing a new building to bring that old building up to today's standard for building structures. So that's, when we talk about the blight finding and this you know, what we're really talking about is that those buildings no longer meet today's building codes, such as ADA, certain electrical types of things. So the
Excuse me.
property within the TIF district was inspected and determined to qualify for the creation of redevelopment TIF district. I think it was more than 70-some% of the buildings didn't qualify, and then over 70% of the parcels were deemed to be occupied by eligible structures.
Question here,
Yeah.
Counselor Luce?
With what you just said, then, you're basically stating that the grandfathered-in statute does not work in a TIF.
What was that?
Grandfathering in old codes per old buildings does not work because they have to meet today's standards.
The threshold for the test is based off of how much it would cost to make that building eligible to today's standards. It doesn't condemn that building or does not put a scarlet letter on that building as being blighted. It's just it's a mechanical issue as to how much would the cost of bringing that building into compliance with today's standards cost, and how much does that correlate to what the cost of rebuilding that building to today's standards be if it were built new.
Second question.
Counselor Luce?
The test that they have to be inhabitable, that just means they have to have sewer, water, be able to be functioning buildings like the track clubhouse. Nobody lives there, nobody sleeps there, but they're humans that inhabit that building.
Yeah, that would be defined as a building in this case, such the same as City Hall would be defined as a building. And what the main point of that, and what was unique about this TIF district and this blight finding is that we had a lot of buildings that weren't buildings, they were outbuildings. So what we needed to do was differentiate, or what LHB needed to do was differentiate what's a building for purposes of this test versus what's an outbuilding, what's a stable, what's a barn. So we're only looking at, in this case, buildings that have sewer, water, utilities are meant for humans to be in. So the shop on the property, you know, it's buildings that either commercial or, or
A
residential.
shed with no power, no water.
No, exactly. A pole barn would not be considered a building per purposes of this study.
Counselor Luce?
One of the buildings I noticed in the test area is a converted two-stall car garage that is used for a leathersmith at this point in time. It was never designed for human inhabitation. It was mainly designed for a garage, but he has converted it into a workshop. But now that went into the test, and I'm just curious how that qualified.
I did not specifically do the test. That was LHB. I would have to defer to them. But again, via their definition of what they consider to be a building within the test, I would assume that that building does have sewer, water.
No, it was built as a two-car garage, no sewer, no water,
Okay, I would have to defer
just
to,
electrical and heat.
okay, I would have to defer to LHB to see if that, typically they want to see the utilities, particularly the sewer and the water, more likely the sewer. It might have been eligible for some other reason. I would defer to them. Even if you were to drop that, say you drop that building out of the test, we're still at 70+% of.
Yeah, I was curious on how they could include that one. I know the gentleman personally, and I was just.
Yeah.
It's a converted building, it wasn't ever meant for that.
Okay. And I can't speak to that specifically, unfortunately.
All right, proceed, thank you.
So yeah, so that was that kind of goes over how the TIF district is eligible to be created. So along with the creation of a TIF district is requirements on how that TIF revenue can be used. We're not allowed to spend money outside of the TIF district boundaries beyond up to 25%. So there's some flexibility. So if there are improvements that are outside the boundaries of the district, in the case of this district, in the case of all districts, the boundaries include all the adjacent right-of-way. So, we include the property line up to the road plus that roadway. So if there's a road that runs along the boundary, that road would be in the district. But there might be the need for certain improvements outside the boundaries of that TIF district. So we can spend a portion of those funds, up to 25%, on reimbursing improvement costs that happen outside that boundaries. But this is limited to a portion, this 25% that we can spend outside the district includes the city's administrative expenses. So if the city is retaining up to 10% of the funds for administrative expenses, that would count against this 25%. So this is more of a net 15.
Counts against it? The 10% admin counts
Yeah,
against?
it falls under this heading. So yeah, so in the city's, the goal of the city is to retain that 10% to provide them the flexibility and make sure that they have a hedge. The city might not use all that 10%, and if they don't use all that 10%, they can use any accumulated balance to also pay down any of the outstanding pay-go note to help shorten the term as well. Beyond that, 90% of the TIF revenue must be used to reimburse the cost of correcting conditions that allow the TIF district to be qualified. We have to use them for redevelopment eligible type costs, which include acquiring property, demolition, clearing of land, and most importantly for this TIF district, installation of utilities, roads, and sidewalks. And we could also use it for parking facilities, but that's not proposed for this TIF district. But when we create a redevelopment TIF district, there's a limited scope for what we can use those funds for, and they have to be related to correcting conditions. Beyond that, the city can retain up to, interestingly, the city's 10% counts as outside the TIF district, but does count as part of the 90%. So I don't try to understand TIF law sometimes. Again, the redevelopment is 25, the length of the district is up to 25 years from the receipt of first increment. So that's,
Sorry, Mr. Reynolds?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, and in response to Councilor Luce's question, the very last two pages in Appendix B specifically outlines the leather shop, workshop, and the description of code deficiencies and the overview of deficiencies, and you can see it there.
Okay. Thank you. Proceed.
so when we create a TIF district, we are making a bunch of assumptions about what future growth is going to happen. These assumptions are subject to change. They're going to be, they're likely to have some differentiation from what we project now because we don't know exactly what's going to happen. We don't know the exact values. We don't know the exact timing, but we can make our best guesses. So we use those best guesses to set a budget. Actual results may vary. Again, that's where shifting that risk burden to the developer is beneficial to the city because, again, actual results may vary. But for purposes of creating this TIF plan, this was the development scenario that we analyzed and we used for basing these TIF projections, and this was based off of information provided by the developer. So we have 46 owner-occupied townhomes. We have 65 owner-occupied senior co-op / condo type units. We have up to 608 potential apartment units proposed within the development. We have a little more than 100,000 square feet of proposed retail and restaurant spaces. We have two approximately 75,000 square foot destination entertainment type buildings that, these are somewhat undefined, but we've assigned an assumed market value of those developments. If those come in a lot higher, it could create additional TIF revenue, shrink the term of the district. Then we've also assumed 300 hotel rooms split between two proposed hotels and up to 783,000 square feet of proposed office and commercial buildings. So again, we've assumed, as I mentioned before, we've assumed no market value inflation growth.
And follow-up, Chris, this question, I follow up on Councilor Lehman's question in regard. So if there's no value for inflation on the build-out of a building, even I think the question he got was on a piece of land that wasn't developed that's in the district, if raw land does increase in value over time, does that stay with the fixed amount? Does it get valued in the fixed amount, or is that captured in incremental?
It'll get captured within the incremental, so that's the actual revenue that will be generated will be based off the growth in market value in the property as a whole, be it inflationary or be it due to construction.
Okay.
That said, when we projected the revenues, when we set the budget, we didn't assume any inflationary growth. So if it takes 26 years, assuming this all gets built out and there's no change in tax, but no change to that market value for each of those years, it would take 26 years. But if that value inflates 2% a year, 1% a year, it's going to start, instead of it being 26 years, it's going to start shrinking that term.
Right. And then vice versa, if it doesn't build out with value to the extent, then the the developer's on the hook on a pay-you-go, because it's not generating enough money back to them, and then they're at risk to pay for that.
Exactly, it will take the full term, but they won't be reimbursed as much as they were anticipated, and that's why we put that risk on their
Okay,
shoulders.
I got both sides of that. Counselor Lehman.
What I was talking about is an existing building that's not gonna be redeveloped. If that existing building increases in value, our general fund does not capture that increased taxation from the increased value because it's captured in a TIF.
That is true in this case, that there are existing buildings that are within this district, they're assumed to be there post-development as well. We have not assumed any market value inflation on those buildings, so if those buildings do inflate, if the value of those buildings does inflate, it will get captured as TIF, but it's not part of this budget. So if those buildings do increase in value, that's gonna be new money to the TIF district that wasn't part of what was projected here. And again, it's gonna help shrink that term.
Second question, how does all of this fix the substandard situation that created the district?
Well, it allows for public improvements to be built within the area, which provide access to the development property and helps create development of sites, which allows those development sites to then be redeveloped. So by creating public improvements and roads and access to the property, we're then creating property that's eligible to be redeveloped. It's not necessarily directly, but the statute allows for public improvements associated with.
So we're not gonna fix the substandard situations that created the district, we're actually gonna tear them down and replace them?
Redevelop them.
Well, the developer will be ultimately tearing them down and redeveloping them. We're not specifically funding them, but we're specifically funding public improvements that would allow those types of activities to occur.
But isn't it supposed to go toward fixing these substandard structures?
It is, but part of the interpretation of statute, or part of the way the statute's written is it allows for public improvements related to those developments that are gonna ultimately.
If
Wait,
something,
wait a minute.
Okay.
A road next to a building that is substandard, replacing the road doesn't make that building standard.
No, it doesn't directly, but if creating, and the idea and what the way statutes crafted and what it allows for is if there's not if the ability to not, or if that property is not able to be redeveloped because there's not adequate access to that building or to that property, and creating a road then provides access to that property, which then leads to somebody else redeveloping that property, it's considered meeting that test. And it's very common that public improvements fall within that 90% test.
They use the building today, so there must be access today.
continue.
All right, so again, going through the TIF plan assumptions, so again, we assume no market value inflation, we assume the city will retain 10% administrative retention. Again, the TIF eligible tax rates proposed for this district to be 128.677%. That'll change based off of whatever the final 2018 tax rates will be. We don't know those quite yet, but the paid 2018 tax rate will be the frozen rate. If the rate goes up, if the rate goes up, that additional revenue generated by the increased rate will be captured as non-TIF dollars and be a benefit to the taxing jurisdictions. If that rate goes down, it will reduce the TIF revenue, but again, that puts that burden for performance on the developer. We proposed the first receipt of increment in 2020. We have the ability to delay this for a number of years. We elected just to have the first eligible year be the first increment received. That'll put the priority and the onus on the developer to get this project started and to get market value created, because they don't have the ability to delay and wait. And we assumed approximately 15% of the total construction or total market value would be constructed starting in 2018. And then if TIF revenue is generated in 2020, the final receipt would be 2045. So again, here you can see the proposed development site. This is a concept plan, but it details the proposed uses. Housing type uses over here, office, and then we've got commercial retail over here. I believe the road alignment's gonna change somewhat pending future study. But that's the concept layout as proposed for right now.
Nice.
Yeah, I don't know what's going on here.
Modern art.
So for whatever reason, this slide is not displaying correctly. What the slide was intending to show, which is a bit of a Rorschach test, is the proposed public improvements that are going to be funded. Do you get another slide available, or I can just?
I think it's been redacted.
Okay. So what this slide is, for whatever reason, the image is airing in the PowerPoint. But you can see on that slide where those purple lines are. Those purple lines were identifying the specific public improvements that would be proposed to be funded by the TIF district. So I'm going to try to just take, if you can follow the mouse pointer here, it's these roads, these outer ring roads here, here, whatever the layout of this public road will be
I don't think you're
here.
The
using
mouse
right-
pointer's not working on ours.
Yeah.
Oh, you can't see that either? Oh, yeah. No pointer up here either, huh? So really, it's the outer ring road, Veerling, Shenandoah, 12th along the bottom, the little private, or not the private, but the public road that'll run through the middle of the development. Those are the specific improvements that are going to be funded by the project.
So
I think Michael's
you're
getting-
saying then that the white section up in the upper right corner with the roundabout, that's not in the TIF?
The roundabout would not be within the boundaries of the TIF district, but it would be eligible for, it's anticipated to be eligible for funding via the portion that's eligible for outside the
That
district.
25% outside of the boundary,
Yeah, so
less
we're-
the 10%.
yeah, yeah, exactly. So we're anticipating that a portion of those costs will be used to fund that. And then you can see along the eastern boundary of the district, there is the County Road 83 improvements. Some portion of that might be funded by the TIF as well. And part of the reason why we don't have a development agreement yet is we're still having to go through negotiations with the county to understand what level of funds might be needed to fund those improvements as well. But the primary use of the funds for the specific public improvements that are going to be proposed to be funded by this, and that will be specifically defined within the development agreement. I believe the intent is for the development agreement to have a map and a specific itemization of what the eligible improvements are going to be, are largely the outer ring public roads that'll be constructed, along with the internal road that'll be Veerling. Want to switch to the camera?
Thank you, Michael.
So yeah, again, the proposed infrastructure improvements to be reimbursed are the, of course, I just,
We're zooming in.
Yeah, just,
so these are the roads that
That's
are
good.
proposed to
That's
be funded via the development agreement. So the developer will be incurring the cost for building these roads, and then the city will be reimbursing them over time based off of future TIF revenue. And then again, on the right here, you can see the County Road 83 improvements, which the county may capture some of the TIF to fund as well.
So, I had a question on, if this were to proceed, and the next, down the line, we're gonna see a master development agreement with more hard numbers, agreement with the county, then would we see, the pink line come down on 83 then?
Yeah, depending on what the final resolution between public or private or county and funding for that, that'll be identified within
Okay.
that development agreement. So
got
that'll be incorporated in that. And the development agreement will specify the public improvements that are to be funded and the location of those improvements.
Counselor Whiting?
And I believe that has a traffic study and that goes along with all of that. So.
Mayor and council, they are in the midst of doing a comprehensive traffic analysis that includes the off-site. So Mr. Dunaway mentioned you can spend up to 15% off-site out of the district. So we don't know yet what those will be, but when we get to the final agreement, you will see where those will go. If you look at the map here, there are some items that are currently in the CIP. So improvements along here with the roundabout, which is currently in the CIP, would be funded out of this. And as he mentioned, we're going to be negotiating with the county of what percentage that they want to take out of the TIF. The other piece we mentioned, there is some land acquisition in the TIF plan because the developer would have to acquire this land over here to connect to Valley Industrial Drive. That was originally part of the county's larger study here, and so they are actually going to be working with the county in the traffic study to implement that. So there'll be some improvements required at this intersection, probably a new signal that would have to be paid for out of the TIF.
Yeah, so to that point, when we talk about land acquisition as a reimbursable expense within the definition of this TIF district, it would be for the developer purchasing property that's not currently owned by the developer and only for right-of-way purposes.
Only for right-of-way?
Yes. And the nice thing is the boundaries of the TIF district do come down this far, so these improvements here and up to here would be eligible within the district. Up here would have to be an out-of-district expenditure. All right, should we flip back to the PowerPoint? I think I just have a couple slides left. And back to our Rorschach test. All right, so when we create the TIF plan, what we're doing is creating budget authority. So we're giving the city the authority to enter into future development agreements that would obligate them to reimburse the developer for eligible expenses. So what the budget in the TIF plan does is it sets that maximum authority for what the total of those future development agreements might be. It doesn't obligate the city to reimburse the developer for any of these funds today, but it gives you the ability to at a future date if you so choose. So for the purposes of this TIF budget, we set a maximum value based off, and what we did is we projected the future revenue, the future development, which corresponded to the future revenue, and then we backed our way into what that budget would be. And that came up to a value of 33 million would be the principal amount of what could be funded now. Reimbursing interest expense based off of current interest rates over time, we assume that that might take up to $42 million in potential interest reimbursement. Again, this will be based off of final terms as proposed within the development agreement and will be subject to future development. If inflation occurs and if the term of this district ends up getting shortened because we were conservative with our revenue assumptions, this interest number will come down. We will save in this area because we'll have future revenue, additional revenue that wasn't projected that will shorten the term of the district, which will save on interest expenses.
It's like a mortgage. If, I'm looking at the interest is higher than the principal amount, and obviously as a homeowner, the faster you pay off your house, the more you save on interest rather than go to term, correct?
Yeah, I remember when I bought my house, there's a form that you have to sign in Minnesota that says how much you're gonna have paid if you make every payment for 30 years, and I just about fell over.
Yeah.
But yeah, so if this term shortens and if we pay it off quicker, this amount will be less. And again, the city has the ability to retain administrative expenses. The city is probably not likely to have up to $8.4 million in administrative expenses for the district. So revenue that's retained here can be used to fund and pay down that outstanding principal amount faster and help also shorten the potential interest incurred on the district. But again, that interest is a function of we have future revenue. This revenue isn't here today. It's going to come in over 26 years, but we have to fund these improvements today. So there's going to be a cost to funding those improvements today.
Counselor Lehman.
Question. The scenario you have here, the 33 is for infrastructure in the ground, and when it's in, you still have a flat piece of ground. There's no revenue to pay for this because it's still a flat piece of ground. So where does this revenue come from? I understand that the taxation on the property goes up because it's now increased in value with the improvements on it, but that's not a...
Yeah, the revenue is going to come from the fact that the developer is going to have to build all of these buildings if they want to get reimbursed the infrastructure costs that they incurred in the first place. So the developer is going to incur up to $33 million in eligible improvements. So they're going to build those roads and they're going to have a flat piece of ground. And if they don't build out all of this development at the rate and at the level with which they projected or they anticipated they will, if they don't build that out, they will get reimbursed somewhat less than $33 million. So that's why that risk and who takes on the funding of that $33 million is important, because if the developer doesn't build that, the city isn't out anything in this case because it's a pay-as-you-go agreement. If the city bonded for those improvements and that development came in at a lesser rate, the city would then have to come out of pocket to make that debt service payment. So
It's paramount for the developer or the applicant to start building this thing out, to start generating captured TIF dollars to pay that out. Otherwise, flat piece of land, you're right, doesn't generate anything, and then you have the roads in there, and the homeowner or developer then is a bad situation. Counselor Lehman.
So what happens if the opposite happens? If you have a trade war and economy kind of slows down and there's no need, no desire on the market for whatever you want to build? and it sits empty for 25 years.
Well, if no revenue is
Does the
generated,
value of the property then drop?
it could, and that could create zero increment. If no value occurs, if there's not any growth in value, no revenue will be generated, and the developer won't be reimbursed that. So that risk, all that unknown risk, is on the developer's shoulders. So if between now and they start building roads and the public improvements aren't done, the district after 5 years, TIF districts have the ability to enter into obligations for 5 years. So you have between now and 5 years from the creation of the TIF district to enter into development agreements. So if you enter into a development agreement with a developer today and war breaks out, this summer and nothing happens, the developer won't have incurred any costs and they won't have any expenses to bring to Darren to get reimbursed for. Then again, nothing will happen. And you would have a period of 5 years for them to come back if, say, things improved and whatnot. They could come back within 5 years and do that. Or somebody else could come back within 5 years and enter into a development agreement with you. But the city only has a finite period within which to enter into those development agreements. And again, it's all about where that risk hedge is, and it's all on the developer's shoulders. So if things go differently than proposed here, it's on the developer's shoulders. If things go better than proposed here, it's to the benefit of the city because it's going to shorten the term.
Counselor Lewis?
When you're doing your calculations for all these numbers, the 42 and the 33 and the payback, what level of development or build-out are you figuring? Are you using a 50% build-out to do your calculations?
It was based off of a 100% build out.
You're doing 100%?
Yeah, so we calculated estimated values for all this build out and assumed it would all come online, I think, over a 5 to 6 year period. If that takes less, or if it takes more time, or if a lesser development happens, again, it's going to decrease the TIF revenue. But again, that's the risk of the developer, not the risk to the city.
That answer your question?
Well, I'm just trying to wrap my head around the fact that if you're gonna build that all out in 6 years, you're not gonna be able to move out there. I mean, it's gonna be under constant construction.
Well, he's got to get the, there is a developer that's identified, or apartment complex, but, I think that what we're talking about here is that, yeah, the risk is on the developer, Canterbury, to build out to get the increment to pay that off, and the city is not at risk for those dollars, the infrastructure's in. If you had a house that the market tipped over and went down in value and then you sold it, you'd be what they call underwater. We certainly do not want that to happen, but again, if that had happened, I don't think the city would be at risk at that point. Councilor Lewis?
Well, and we all know that this is all prevailing on the fact that this housing project that's on the east side here is going in. That's 25% of the funding for this whole.
Right, but you asked a question about
I know,
how much that was, the whole thing is built out. You want it to be successful. The developer has to have it
Correct, but
successful as well.
They've got a great start with the
Yeah, yes, I do.
apartment buildings. There's 25% right there.
Continue.
Mayor and council, that's correct. So what Councilmember Luce pointed out is that fiscal disparities in the state taxes are not paid on residential, so 100% of that revenue will go into the district, and as part of the development plan, you will see a phasing plan for the roads, and I can almost assure you the first road to be built will be Shenandoah and the roundabout on Eagle Creek, because as this project gets built, sooner or later, people will have to be able to get access to live there, so that will be one of the first roads constructed. And the developer in the city and the county are well aware that we're gonna have to connect all these roads and work together. So we'll be looking at Barronshire up here when that needs to get built, and then also what improvements are done to 12th Avenue tie into the Highway 83 improvements. So you will see a phase plan with years attached to them and dollars attached to them when you see the final development agreement.
And the developer will all get credit for roads that they've actually constructed. So if, the principal balance of the PAYGO note doesn't start out 33 million. It starts out at what roads they've constructed, and it can grow up to whatever the principal amount of the note will be once they've constructed all of those roads.
Continue.
Well, pleasantly, I think we're just about done. So this is the TIF revenue budget. So again, we set the revenue or the expenses to equal the total revenue. The revenue was based off of 100% 100% build out of the site. So, and I think as we've hit on multiple times during this, the development risk, everything is on the developer. They must get a loan to do the public improvements. They have to fund these public improvements in advance of future revenue coming back to them to reimburse them. The city will review the plans and inspect all the construction and accept all the improvements prior to them becoming eligible for reimbursement. The city's gonna make sure via terms within the development agreement that they're gonna be built up to city standards. All public improvements must be completed in 5 years, so they'll have that 5-year window within which to construct those roads and have an eligible pay-go note. If the TIF revenue doesn't cover the cost, the developer's responsible for the difference. If TIF revenue doesn't come in as projected, the city got a deal or discount on the cost of building those new roads, ultimately. So next steps. So the first step would be, if you so choose, the approval of the TIF district tonight. That TIF district plan would provide the authority to enter into future development agreements. So if you want to approve the TIF district, we could adopt the resolution, and then at a future date, you would then have the ability to review development agreements, or multiple development agreements and specific terms of assistance and associated improvements. So right now, you're giving yourself the authority to enter into future development agreements, but you're not obligating yourself to do anything tonight.
Well, this first step here, or this step at least, is setting the district, which is the map, and identifying what can be done on it, and then a cap of the funds. I guess I bring it down to an example of every year a community sets the preliminary levy in September, late September, and then for a couple months you work that down and then come to a final levy. So it's just the map and the amount, the maximum amount that could be generated out of the full build-out of this district, of what's in that map, correct?
I think that's a fair analogy.
Without a developer's agreement, anything that was approved tonight would be mute. Counselor Lewis.
The interest that you've shown here, is that calculated from day one, or have you incremented that in over 5 years as it'll be used?
For purposes of creating this budget, it is calculated from a presumed date of incurring the cost a couple years out in the future. In actuality, it'll be measured from when they provide documented receipts. So they'll get reimbursed from when they actually start incurring cost, but not before that. So
Similar to a construction loan, as you use it.
yes, exactly. So if they take out a construction loan, they provide receipts to Darren saying they incurred costs for Veerling on this date. We'll calculate interest based off of that date. So it's the development agreement's structured to ensure that the city pays the smallest amount of interest possible.
Yeah, the reason I ask is because day one of 5 years or the end of 5 years makes a big difference on $33
Exactly.
million.
Exactly. That's why they're structured that way. We don't want to, they don't just get to start collecting interest on this from today. They might want to, but they don't.
All right, good question. Proceed?
That's it.
All right.
Any questions or any more
No,
questions?
we'll move ahead. Further questions? From a student to someone that wants to learn all the time, Tom, really, I classify this as a senior class in college, a 400 level class on TIF. I know you were here a couple months ago, but I thought your review and explanation was
Thank you.
excellent.
Hopefully it was understandable. Oh,
Counselor Lewis?
Yeah, after doing my due diligence and doing all the reading on it and your explanations, I thank you. It was very well.
thank you.
We'll reserve to call you back on other questions as we proceed. Next, if the developer would like to come forward, this is a public hearing. State your name and address for the record, and welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and members of the council. My name is Randy Sampson. I am the CEO of Canterbury Park, and I appreciate the opportunity to make a few comments. As you mentioned, Mr. Denaway made this pretty easy because he covered in so much detail, and on some of the things that I wanted to highlight, he's done a very good job. So I'll go through it quickly, and then mainly want to be available for any questions. And there were a couple of questions that already came up for Mr. Denaway that maybe I can address when I get done. But you've previously been generous here. I appreciate the chance. We've had a couple opportunities already to talk about our history and Canterbury's role in the community, as well as our vision for the redevelopment. So I'm not going to go back into those areas. We're here tonight really to talk about this TIF plan, but I do want to highlight that from the previous discussions that you know, this is something, you know, the community has wanted for, you know, as you've said, Mr. Mayor, 20 years, 30 years, you know, this community's been looking for this development to take place around Canterbury's property. It's an area that is, the city needs to see developed, and there's great opportunity. And you know, we have been actively working at Canterbury Park for over 10 years now, trying to work through how to make this development happen. And you know, the reason it's taken so long is it is a very large, and it's also a very complicated project, and there's some unique challenges that I will talk about. But you know, we've been taking a long time because we really want to do this right. We want to create a development that we all can be proud of, and something that is, you know, something the community's looking for, which is really a transformative development, not just dropping a few things in onto our current bare land, but really a transformative development, as was mentioned by Mr. Denaway, you know, unique mixed-use destination. You saw the various uses that we're talking about, and you know, a real opportunity for some new, you know, much-needed residential options, some entertainment, retail, hospitality options, and also, as we've said before, you know, a real opportunity to grow you know, what's been currently successful in Shakopee with some great jobs, you know, with office headquarter type opportunity that we believe, you know, with the public-private partnership that we're talking about here tonight, that we have a great opportunity to create Canterbury Commons, which, as we've said, we want to be a unique place to live, stay, work, and play. So tonight, as was mentioned, you know, we're here to talk about the tax increment financing plan, and as has been mentioned, that really will just set the framework for broader discussions that need to take place after we complete traffic studies and road engineering and other issues that need to be worked through. County certainly has been mentioned as an issue. How do we get County Road 83, you know, to where it needs to be to accommodate the development that we're talking about? But I do want to say, so we're here, you know, it's the first action of this council on the requested TIF, tax increment financing district, but it isn't the first time that this discussion has come up. As was mentioned, you know, and you've all seen the TIF study that was done, you know, that actually was approved by the city council in June of 2014, approved this study, approved the city to contract with LHB to conduct this study. So this, you know, this isn't something that you know, we haven't been forthright in terms of that this needs to be part of our long-term development plan, and, you know, going back almost 4 years, and as, you know, the study was completed in 14 or 15 and recently updated. So what we are asking the city, you know, tonight is to approve that TIF plan that has been described, and we, as we mentioned, you know, we have a terrific developer, one of the top residential developers in the Twin Cities, and they are ready to move forward. They're ready to develop a terrific project, and a product that doesn't exist in this market, and, you know, willing to invest $100 million in this community. And we would all like to see them start construction on that this fall. And to stay on that timeline, we really need to keep this process moving. So we appreciate your consideration tonight, and hope that you will see your way to approving this TIF plan and allow us to continue on with the next steps of actually creating the development agreement. You know, this is a first step, and you know, the agreement will define the roads, the infrastructure designations, locations of those roads. You saw a map here. We expect that's likely to change once the studies are done, and the city and county engineering folks, transportation folks have their ability to review. We will, you know, it'll include the actual costs. We've got cost estimates in there now, but it'll include the actual costs as well as the timeline for construction. And as has been mentioned, we will, you know, the anticipation is that Canterbury will pay for those up front, and we will, you know, we have a, you know, we have a strong balance sheet, which is good right now. We've got assets and we've got some cash, but this investment, you know, will require, as has been said, somewhere in the 20 to 30 million dollar range from Canterbury, depending again on how the county piece works and how much of, will they pay their, their piece. We're not sure exactly what the Canterbury portion up front will be, but it'll be at least $20 million to build out the roads on our property, as well as some of the surrounding roads that were mentioned. And we understand that we are at risk for that. We have to pay for that. And if there is no development that takes place, the city won't reimburse us for those costs. The city's not out anything. We've developed those roads. Obviously, we wouldn't do that if we weren't confident that we have a plan that can be successful. As Councilman Luce mentioned, what has really been the key to our ability to move this forward is the apartment complex. That if we were here talking about, we want to build these 20 million worth of roads and we hope somebody eventually will come in here, I couldn't go to my board of directors and say that we're going to, that we're prepared to take that kind of risk. But with the apartment, assuming we can keep moving forward and get that apartment locked in, that does create a TIF increment that makes this project viable and allows us to be able to actually go out and finance what we need to finance based on the forecasted future revenues that will come back to help us retire that debt. So again, the city has no risk on that development up front. But so the other piece that I want to talk about are the question of why does this require, why can't we do this privately? Why does this require this public-private partnership? And there's two components that make this development challenging and unique. One of them is the road infrastructure that we talked about. And when you see the magnitude of the roads that are required, this isn't your traditional development where you're just going to put some roads in to serve what is being built there. These are creating connections that the surrounding neighbors and the whole community will benefit from, and they are there's much more expensive in terms of the roads for the amount of development that we will see there. And so it's a unique challenge in terms of there's a higher than usual cost to provide all of the infrastructure that is going to be required to make this development viable. And that is what obviously we are asking the city to utilize tax increment financing to help us fund those public infrastructure costs only. As you saw, there are actually the ability to pay for other costs legally. That's not being discussed here. We're only talking about, it was mentioned, demolition costs for the barns, some parking, some other development costs are potentially, TIF eligible, but that's not what we're talking about here. We're strictly talking about the road infrastructure. The piece, to address Councilman Lehman's question, and the other piece that is unique here, and why this is a redevelopment project, not your traditional development, is this requirement that we relocate barns and renovate that backside area. We do have a substandard situation there, but more importantly, really, we have a unique opportunity that intersection and that gateway can be a really unique and inviting, wow, welcome to Shakopee is what that should be, instead of, wow, look at those barns and chain link fence and barbed wire. They're 35-year-old barns. And so how do we create a gateway and entrance to the facility and an ability to develop our property that borders 83 and 12th Avenue, which has, which is a very prominent intersection and gateway for this community. And so the question Mr. Lehman, Councilman Lehman asked, the city is not paying as part of this for those barns. We are. And as part of this redevelopment, we anticipate in excess of $20 million of cost, again, that we have to pay. This is in addition to the $20 million that we have to pay to build the roads. We anticipate $20 million of private investment costs to relocate barns, to renovate barns, to demolish the barns that are currently there, to create our private roads that will be required to be redone to connect to the new streets and any streets that are within the Doran project, any private streets that are within our project are not being paid for out of this, only the public main roads that you saw. And so there is we will have significant skin in the game, and again, we are doing it because we believe that there is a great opportunity to create a unique development that will, in the long run, provide benefit to Canterbury Park as well as the surrounding community. As we had said before, part of the problem was, before the freeway came in, the barn area was really the back door, and now with the freeway and the entrance, that has become a very prominent commercial, entertainment, and business area, and right now the barn area is not the highest and best use for that property or, in the best interests of the city. When we talk to people like Doran about their apartment building, when we talk to people about potentially an office headquarters type facility, which we've had discussions about, they all are saying, well, what are you going to do about 12th Avenue? We don't want to put our image of our corporate headquarters. We can't be going past chain link fences and a barn area. They want to see a boulevard that creates an attractive entrance, that creates a type of development that people want to be part of. The restaurants are the same thing, the hotels are the same thing, the entertainment, it all needs to be done correctly if you're going to maximize the development opportunity. So, I guess the final comment again is if, the question of can it be done privately, what would happen if there was no public-private partnership or tax increment financing, and there certainly would be an opportunity. The corn maze land that we purchased from the Gene Hauer, there would be an ability to ultimately develop that into something. It could be warehouses, it could be something. Maybe there's some apartment buildings, but it wouldn't be the highest and best opportunity for development that we want to see. That will only happen if we are able to create a transformative development that involves moving the barns, again, at our expense, and eliminating the blight or the substandard situation that currently is there, and creating what we believe will be something, again, that we can all be proud of.
Thank you. Excellent. Questions of the developer, Councilor Lehman?
Mayor, I think one thing that's always lost in this conversation is that realistically, the way I see this is the city is reimbursing you for these improvements with future tax dollars. So what does the average taxpayer in Shakopee donating to this cause? They're donating the next 25 years worth of taxation, normal taxation off the property. It could be the taxation from market value increase of what's currently there, or it could be the taxation of new improvements. But either way, for the life of the TIF, any tax dollars are going back to reimburse you for your expenses for these improvements. And not only that, but you're actually going to get reimbursed twice. You're going to get your full investment back and more than that in interest, if it works out that way. So, not that it's good, bad, or indifferent, that's just the way it is.
Councilor Lewis?
Do you have an estimate of how many miles of roadway that is, out of curiosity? I estimated at 4, I'm just,
The public roads.
3 or 4, I would think, is in the ballpark, yeah.
okay. And I'm, from what I'm seeing here, the only reason that you're limiting it to roadways is the property taxation on the properties that you plan to put in there won't support anything more than that. The barns would never pay for themselves, you'd end up paying for them anyway. If you put
Mr.
them in the
Mayor,
TIF,
Councilman Lou said
it would never pay for itself.
there is far more cost here than would be able to be recaptured as we currently are estimating now. Is there, hopefully we have been conservative in terms of what the actual build out and when it'll happen. But yes, your answer is correct, that even if we put that in the TIF plan, there wouldn't be enough revenue to really pay for it out of the TIF.
One follow-up.
Yeah.
The 20 million factor that you just stated that was gonna be private input, I would have loved to have heard that about 2 months ago. I mean, that's been a sticker in a lot of people's craw, and it makes it a lot different of an angle for me to make a decision, that I know, you know, people won't say they want skin in the game. 20 million's a pretty good chunk.
Great point. Other questions of the applicant? I have, Randy, I've been aware of Canterbury for a long time, 30-plus years. Not a lot of development on your properties, a lot of development around it. This project in scope appears to be one of the largest projects in Shakopee's history. From Mr. Dunaway's presentation, pay-as-you-go, it seems like you're taking an enormous risk. Why would you do that?
Well, Mr. Mayor, that's a very good question, but we do wanna, we all would love to see that area develop into something unique, and obviously we couldn't do that if we didn't think there was a financially viable outcome, but is this gonna be, a windfall to Canterbury like a lot of people think it is? There's a tremendous amount of risk here, and it has to develop out in the economy. Everybody knows things could turn the other way, and so, what I will say is that, in response to the other comments is, this, yes, the increased taxes are being captured to pay for roads and infrastructure, but that increased taxes could not happen without this partnership. I want to be very clear that there is the 20 million that we would have to spend to move the barns and internal roads and the site prep and the demolition and the other things that make up that 20 million, plus the roads, the land that we would have to develop would not be worth that. It is a simple, case of math, and that is why tax increment financing for redevelopment has been proposed, and why it's used in these types of difficult developments, because there are times where the cost to redevelop is, it is different than a greenfield bare land development, but the cost to redevelop exceed in many cases what the actual value would be, and we would not be able to move forward with this kind of development.
Councilor Luce?
Yeah, to your point there, I did talk to the county on it, the taxation people, and I also spoke to other developers, and they said they would most likely, or they would prefer greenfield over coming into something that's been developed and have to, because you got all the demolition costs and everything else, it gets very expensive.
Excellent. Any other questions for Mr. Sampson? If not, thank you very much.
Thank you.
This is a public hearing. Open it up to the public. If you'd like to come forward and make comment on this, please come forward. State your name and address for the record, and welcome.
Hi, Mayor and members of the council. My name is Dan Russell. I live at 421 Fifth Avenue West here in Shakopee. And the reason I was motivated to come here this evening is I've made Shakopee my home. I've been teaching here for 19 years. Bought a home here, got married here, raising a family here, created a small business here. And when I heard about Canterbury Commons, I had a lot of questions. And after investigating it, it just seems to me as though this is an opportunity that this city has to take advantage of. I so appreciate the members of the council doing their due diligence and looking out for the taxpayers of this community. But looking at what this can do for our community, I think that it's a no-brainer. I really do. I think that this can transform that part of Shakopee and make this what Shakopee truly can be. It's a unique community with its combination of history and new development, being a location for amusement with Valley Fair, Mystic, Canterbury here. I think this is really going to be the icing on the cake, so to speak, for new development for this community. And I really, really want to see this move forward. I know there are a lot of other people in this community who see it that way as well. Thanks for giving me a minute.
Thank you. This is a public hearing. Anybody else like to come forward and make comment on this proposal? And thank you.
I don't know how to get it up here. My name's Robert Polk, 2767 Howard Trail.
Welcome.
I don't know if anybody's familiar with my property or not, so I'm going to show you here quick.
Hang on 1 second here. Bear with us.
So it's always just outside of the thing here. Can I draw on this by chance, just a little X? My house is right here. Anybody see that?
Yep.
I own the second largest piece of property on this 1 mile stretch. Can somebody assure me that I'm not gonna be assessed for improvements on County Road 16 for this development?
Mr. Reynolds?
I mean, we've heard for 3 months, all the
No,
people
I-
that have lived here for 30 years,
Yeah.
and they work here and they play here. Randy, this is a great development. I think we might talk about it a little bit. My biggest concern is I don't want to be assessed on that property. This property was assessed 20 years ago, almost $20,000 for the curb and gutter that went in there. And we're gonna have to do something with 16. Everybody knows how busy that road is already, and if we're gonna put 3 ways into that development, we're gonna have to do something with that.
The whole purpose of using the TIF funds to pay for this property is to essentially fully complete all that needs to be done. Now, we have an assessment policy. I don't know about the specifics in regards to how that would work with this particular development, but we'd have to look at that.
With-
I don't
with my
have an,
calculations-
Steve, you may know more than I do on this.
With my calculations tonight, we can use 15% outside of the TIF area for
The last time it was reconstructed was 20 years ago, 25 years?
20-some, back when I bought it, there was an assessment.
We're getting ready
that was
to,
paid when I bought it. I
Yeah.
didn't pay it myself, it came from the previous owner.
Steve? Yeah.
But my
Steve?
question is, out of the 15% that we can use outside of that,
Oh, Eagle Creek's a
that's
county
about
road.
$4.5 million.
City. Let me just, that is
Go.
in the district, so we have included Eagle Creek in the district.
Okay,
So, as Mr. Dunaway mentioned, we drew the line out to the roads. So he pointed out, I think, the district line's about here, and it runs down this road and comes back across, so.
so it's about a 2-mile stretch. There's about $4.5 million there if we use that 15%. I'm not a mathematician, but that's about $200 a foot.
So,
I don't think we can do road improvements for $200 a foot the last time I checked. So I'm just questioning
yep, Michael.
where it's coming from.
So that 15%, as I mentioned before, the only area currently, and I'm sure after we get done with the traffic study and work with the county, there'll be some other areas, but currently, the only area outside of the district is right here. So that 15%, based on our calculations, would pay for the piece that would bridge over to Valley Industrial. This area down here is in the district.
So if it was in the district, all the increment would be captured and paid for that.
Very good, thank
That
you.
was what I was gonna point out.
Okay, not a problem.
That
And you,
answers
you
my
spoke
question.
before this board before, right, on the
I
same?
have spoke on this
Yep,
before,
and-
I'm for it.
Oh.
I'm not against this project at all, and I've made that very clear to Randy, I think this is great. My
Oh, that's
father-
okay.
My father wired that place many years ago. I'm just concerned that I don't want to be assessed on this property, and that's a fair idea for me. I'm gonna be looking at the back of a building someday.
Yep,
I don't know what it's gonna do to the market of the value of my home. I don't think looking at the back of an office building is gonna improve the market on my house. So,
you could walk to work.
I won't be working there. Unless Randy's gonna offer me a job. But, no, I won't be working there, but I'm just saying, I'm gonna look at the back of that building. Nobody else on 16 is gonna look at the back of that building, I am. My land goes right down to it, so I'm concerned about it.
Thank you for your concern and your comments. Steve, did you want to make a brief comment on it?
Certainly, Mayor and council members, as part of the proposed projects with this TIF, it is not planned that any other adjacent properties would be assessed. Uniquely, I was just doodling here, if this project just didn't go forward,
Yeah.
there are needed improvements out there. For example, 12th Avenue is included in this project, in the TIF district, and would be reconstructed. And there are other improvements. And without Canterbury Commons happening, the city would need to probably, within the next 5 years, 6 years, go forward with about $7 million worth of these projects, just because I just drove on 12th Avenue today, and it's in pretty tough shape. So the city, independent of Canterbury Commons, would have to proceed with some of these projects. And in that scenario where Canterbury Commons wasn't here with a TIF, there would be it's typically with a reconstruction project, it's a 30% assessed, 70% city cost. So that would be a different scenario that the city should consider as
Interesting.
well.
Thank you for that bit of information, Counselor Lewis.
Yeah, I've been on 12th Avenue too, and to Shakopee standards, it's in pretty tough shape. To St. Paul standards, that's perfect road.
Par, yeah.
This is a public hearing. If you'd like to come make comment about this district, TIF district, please come forward. State your name and address for the record. And welcome. Seeing none, Counselor Lewis?
Make a motion to close the public hearing.
Second.
I have a motion and a second to close the public hearing. Further discussion? 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 All in favor, say aye. Aye. Those opposed? Motion passes. Public hearing is now closed. Make a motion.
Do we need a vote on this?
Counselor Lehman?
I'll make a motion for a short recess.
Well, let's get this through first. People may want to go.
I don't think that
Huh?
we need to vote on the public hearing piece, though.
We
That
already
is-
agreed
we
that
go into
anybody
EDA and
asking
then we
for a
vote.
recess
Oh.
gets it.
There's no vote on this.
Okay.
There'll be a vote.
Okay.
Well, the public hearing is closed, and now there's been a request for a short recess. So before we take up the matter by the council, we will take a recess for 8 minutes. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed? We'll stand in recess. Thank you. reconvene this City Council, City of Shakopee City Council meeting for March 6, 2018. We are going to, after break here, we're going to recess and move into our Economic Development Authority meeting and have more discussion. Councilor Whiting?
I'll make a motion to recess to the Economic Development Authority meeting.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Further discussion? Discussion. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed, motion carries. We're now in our EDA. President Lehman.
And we'll call the EDA for Shakopee to order, please, and have the secretary please note the roll. You all should have an agenda in front of you with a packet of information, and first item of business would be approving of the agenda. Is there a motion, Mr. Mars?
Mr. President, I'll offer the agenda as stated. Second.
Second of them, Mr. Luce. Any discussion on the agenda? Staff? Nope. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. Consent agenda consists of our EDA minutes for February 7th. Ms. Mokel.
Make a motion to approve the consent business.
Second.
Motion by Ms. Mokel, second by Mr. Luce. All in favor, say aye. Aye. All opposed? Motion passes. General item business 4A, approval of sales contract with Doggy Doos. Mr. Kursky.
President and board members, this is a proposal to sell approximately 2 acres out at the property the city acquired some time ago from MnDOT to allow them to relocate from their current location and construct approximately a $1 million new building on those 2 acres, plus make some additional improvements to their business.
Can you speak up just a little bit more or move that mic up? There, thank you. Questions of staff on this item?
I just,
Mars?
yes, Mr. President. They're going to lease this back for a little bit. Is that correct?
Mr. President, board members, no. There's a separate item on your agenda. What will happen is
Oh,
we will
okay,
be leasing.
I apologize. I see that.
We will be leasing back the building that we're acquiring April 1st. That's their current location, so they can build their new building.
Okay.
Further question, this is the sale of the West End property, MnDOT right-of-way that we acquired in 2015, I believe it was. Mr.
Mr. Luce has a question.
Go ahead, Mr. Whiting, and then we'll go to Mr. Luce.
Well, I was gonna, we've discussed this in a closed workshop for the sale of the property, so we're familiar with this, but, I would offer resolution number E 2018-006, authorizing the sale of property to Doggy Doos for property located in the West Shakopee Gateway, Block 1, Lot 1.
Is there a second to the motion?
Second.
Second by Mr. Mokel. Mr. Luce?
They got a question here. The city will also an infiltration basin at the front of their property. Is that something we're paying for?
Mr. President and board members, yes, as part of the construction of the Veerling Drive extension, we're constructing an infiltration basin for the road. That's a pretty substantial road with a roundabout, and we'll also be having a new drainage basin to the back of that property. So on the front side, it'll be in front of their building, and on the back side, it'll be adjacent to the parkland.
The, excuse me, the one thing I would point out to the motion maker and seconder that, and I'd like to offer a friendly amendment to that motion. The friendly amendment would be where the bottom budget impacts, it says proceeds will go to the EDA account. The funds to acquire this property actually came from a inter-fund loan from the equipment fund, and the funds should go back to repay that account.
So, Mr. President and board members, what we're going to do is collect all the funds into the EDA account and then pay back into the fund that was borrowed from, and then we're putting this road out to bid. Some of the money, the shortfall in the bid will go towards that, and then whatever remains will stay in the EDA account. So that'll be a separate item. Once we collect enough to pay that back in the account, the intention is to repay that fund.
Well, it took me a while to find it because I was here for this. It was February 17th, 2015. The interfund loan amount was $926,670, and it was from the equipment fund. So we need to make sure we repay that fund.
Yes, sir, that will happen. We're just accounting for it
Yep,
by having it all in one place, and then we'll move it out to where it needs to go.
okay. Mr. Luce, you had a question?
Well, we're gonna make an accounting notation on that so that we don't end up spending that somewhere else?
Yeah, Mr. President, Commissioners, we do have that due to, or that advance on the books, and so we are accounting for that, and we are making sure that that gets shored up at the appropriate time, so.
Okay. Any other discussion on the motion and second? Hearing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Item number 4B, approval of sale contract with Topaz Investment or its assigns. Mr. Kursky.
Mr. President and board members, again, this was the group that was attached to Doggy Doos when they were going to construct a facility for handicapped individuals on First Avenue. Since that property went away, they have agreed to move out to this site. They have received their CUP. They're actually working with Doggy Doos. Their site's a little unusual in that there's a perpetual easement that runs between Doggy Doos and their site that's basically a driveway to the shopping center. So they're coordinating rebuilding that driveway because it will also serve as a driveway to them. So Topaz Investments will construct up to 3 buildings there. They currently have funding for the first building, so they will build their building along with the Doggy Doo building as part of this project.
Mr. Lewis.
A couple comments here. I believe that was a treatment center instead of a handicapped building, and just so that...
Mr. President and board members, those individuals are treated by the federal government as people that are handicapped, so that's
Okay.
why we refer it
Fine.
to that way.
And did you want to put that map up and show which parcels you were talking about, please?
If I had that map,
That's Lot 2, Block 1, was it?
I could borrow. That is an exhibit I did not print out.
Oh, sorry about that.
And just for the record, if I might, the term handicapped is somewhat derogatory. I believe special needs is the current language that's being used. So
He
if we
says the
could,
federal government requires it to be
Well,
handicapped.
Gotta flip that.
in the future, if we could,
Yeah, our current code actually says handicap. That's why we had to do
yeah,
that.
I think it should be changed. That's,
So, Mr. Kursky, if you could just point out, the first action was Doggy Doos, that's that long strip.
Zoom me in there.
Trying.
That's good. Get this focused. So the first parcel to be sold will be Doggy Doos, which will be this one right here. That infiltration basin sits right in the front here. This is the piece that will go to Topaz Investments. And that driveway is right here. That's a perpetual easement that serves the shopping center. And we're working, there's a CUP currently on the agenda for Thursday's Board of Adjustments for a new school that'll go here. One of the conditions is that school actually will use the new road once it's constructed and not be using this driveway for the school buses.
So where would the access point be to the Doggy Doo and Topaz property?
So this is a roundabout, so they will have at this driveway will have a hard median right here, and this will be a right in, right out. So their customers, if they're coming from this neighborhood over here, actually can go through the shopping center and come in this way. And if they're coming any other direction, they can go around the roundabout and then do a right in and then a right back out.
Okay. And because of the distance from 69 is not
Yes, sir.
long enough for the stacking? Okay. Mr. Luce?
yeah, that permanent easement, is that, are they liable for that, or is that a city liability?
Mr. President and board members, it's their liability.
Okay.
That's why the property line actually runs down the middle of that easement.
Okay. And then I assume we have a easement on both sides for utilities or whatever, Mr. Mars?
Mr. President, then, so for Topaz Investments and or sign, that value of that building will be about $10 million?
Yes, sir. Of the 3 buildings.
Yeah.
So you're looking at about $1 million here, over probably the next 3 or 4 years, $10 million right here.
Any other questions, Ms. Moko? Sorry.
I make a motion to approve the resolution number E 2018-004 with Topaz Investments for $125,000 an acre for development of housing and services for handicapped individuals.
Second.
Seconded by Mr. Whiting. Did you have a question, Mr. Mars? Or were you making a
No,
second?
I was making a second, but I got beat.
Okay.
Sorry.
Any other discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes 5-0. 4C, approval of sale of contract with Trident Development.
Mr. President, board members, that's for this parcel back here. So this is a parcel that's currently set aside for a park. This is a regional detention basin.
Your head's in the way, sir.
Sorry. Next time I'm putting it on a PowerPoint. It's for this parcel right here. This is set aside as a regional park for this area. And also, when you approve the plat, the park dedication, that doesn't have to be paid, but they've agreed to pay. So Doggy Doos and Topaz and whoever else develops out here will pay into a fund to improve this, and the leftover funds will go back into the park asset fund. So this is currently a fairly wooded lot, and we're going to develop a plan as this develops to improve this park. And then again, this is a regional detention basin that captures water in this area and also from the road that's owned by the city and will be maintained by the city.
Questions of staff? Mr. Luce?
That proposed parkland, I believe that is the old Davies addition, am I mistaken?
Mr. President and Member Luce, you are correct. And so we are, one of the issues that's held this up is we went to file this plat and the county said, you know, there's an old road that runs through here that this was not part of the city. We've been able to get that removed, so it'll be back to you for a final plat.
Okay, and I also believe there was wells in that area?
We did have, WSB did a pretty exhaustive survey of this area, and the wells actually were found to be up in this area. So they did not locate any wells when they did their last search in this area. But when we do the park development, we'll do a much more thorough investigation.
Suppose we could do a trivia and see if anybody knows what the name of that road was, short of staff, okay? That wouldn't be fair.
I read it, so I know.
Okay. Any other questions of staff?
That's a name we can use again.
Yeah.
Mr. Mars?
Mr. President, I'll offer resolution E 2018-005, the sale of approximately 4 acres to Trident.
Second.
Motion by Mr. Mars, seconded by Mr. Luce. Any discussion on the motion? Mr. Mars?
I just want to compliment staff for bringing these parcels together and putting these parcels back on the tax rolls.
And I
Been
would
a long time coming.
like to compliment, we've worked with the city engineer. This has been a difficult road project that he was thrown into, and I think you'll all be, once we get it built, you'll be pretty impressed. It really will serve as a major gateway into that area.
Mr. Luce?
With these parcels sold, I'm just curious, where are we financially as far as our payback?
Mr. President, board member, we're getting close. We wanted to wait. We have a couple other people we're working on so that we can bring enough funds to pay back that note and have some funds in the EDA account.
I guess what I'm getting at, though, is when we're totally sold out of property up here, we are gonna be in the black.
We will have a net of about $1 million if all the property sells.
Thank you.
Well, and it depends how you split that up, because we also have the cost of the road that we built.
Yep.
And you're not including that because that wasn't part of the note. But it does serve a connection that this body and past bodies have decided was an important connection to 69 over to Veerling, so east-west.
We have
Mr.
tax revenue, too.
And you'll have tax revenue.
$1 million on a very short-term investment is a pretty good return.
Yeah.
Any other discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, motion passes. Item 4D, reimbursement of certain expenses out of the Riverfront TIF.
So, Mr. President and board members, so we have to close on the Doggy Doos property April 1st based on the contract that was approved. So that's $400,000 of this. We're also have already spent some money there that we want to get reimbursed for environmental. And as you know, we have a developers interested in this property. One of the last outstanding issues, if and when we ever get rid of the snow, is to do some additional borings there. They did find, the initial borings, some bedrock close to the road. They want some closer borings to be able to complete to see how deep the bedrock is there, because they will have to remove it as part of their project.
Questions of staff? Mr. Lewis.
Which road are you referring to, Levy Drive?
So Levy Drive, member, is, it's not clear what's there. That, we heard from an adjoining property owner that at one point that was a mining operation, and that's why there is no stone there. They did find bedrock 2 feet in the Doggy Doos parking lot and about 4 feet over in the house. They also picked up, if you remember, we have some environmental issues there that have nothing to do with our property. So across the street, which is currently a laundromat, was formerly a dry cleaner. Perctetachloride, which is perc, known in the dry cleaning industry. There was a spill in that area which has leached into our property. So we will be working with all the different organizations for some brownfield cleanup money. Also across the street, diagonally where the lawn service building is, that was an old oil depot, and they had a major spill there over a number of years. That has now leached into our property, and over the next decades, eventually will make its way to the river, because it's way down deep into the stone. But we're gonna have to do some additional remediation work to make sure that that doesn't harm the river. So we will be going out for all the brownfields grants that we can find.
Mr. Kursky, I have a couple questions. I'm reading this, and we spent, almost $400,000 to acquire the properties, and now we're gonna spend $800,000 on investigating and possible remediation. So we're gonna have 1.2 million into it.
Mr. President, no. So
No?
the amount we're talking about here is to allow us to get reimbursed for the money that we've already spent acquiring the properties.
Okay, so that's included in the
That's
800.
included in that number. So
Okay.
we spent 125,000, I think, on the house. We're going to spend $375,000 on the Doggy Doos building, and we have probably $15,000 or $20,000 currently in environmental remediation. We want to recapture all of that, plus any future expenses the city has to spend to remediate that property, so that we can get reimbursed. If we don't do this, we can't get reimbursed, and there's a tight time
Do it before.
window we have to do this, and since the closing's coming up, we want to make sure we capture that acquisition cost.
And what's the length of the TIF that's gonna be proposed on that parcel?
We are eligible for 15 to 25 years, depending on what council chooses.
Okay.
The last TIF run that they ran, since this is residential, it's 100%, was present value $3 million, if I remember. It was about $3 million.
Any other questions? Mr. Whiting?
I'll make a motion to approve the interfund loan to allow for redevelopment costs to be reimbursed by potential TIF number 19 for the River Bluff project. Looks like the number is E 2018-001.
Is there a second to the motion? Ms. Mokel? I guess I didn't read that in the memo. Is that even in the memo, that it's for reimbursement of the acquisition cost?
If I missed that, Mr. President, I apologize, but that's what this is for. There's $800,000 in the resolution to reimburse us for the property acquisition and any future remediation costs that we might experience. And any environmental or any other costs we have, we can get
We
reimbursed.
have to have this in place before any further action, so we get reimbursed later.
Yes, sir.
Any other discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Myself, pass 4-1. 5E, resolution approving tax increment financing plan for tax redevelopment district 18. Modified plan for Minnesota River Valley Housing and Redevelopment Project number 1.
So, Mr. President and board members, this is required. So the EDA is actually the funneling area for collection of the TIF revenue for the 10%. That's what it gets charged against and other expenses. So that's why you also have this resolution. So you had the public hearing for the city side. You have, under a later agenda item on the city agenda, the same resolution. So the EDA has to also pass the same resolution.
Any questions of staff? Okay, I guess I'll start out. So I received this information, lots of information, Friday afternoon, work Saturday. So really, I had Monday to study it, or try to study it. And as I'm reading through it, there's a lot of empty spaces where it appears that the school board and the county don't really have a date listed in here that they've actually taken any kind of action on it. Then we all received the letter from the county. It appears the transportation study from July in the EAW is what the county is looking for to have a better handle on what their needs are for 83. And I'll be just blunt and honest, it would be really nice to have some time to actually look through a document that is talking about $80 million for more than 48 hours.
Mr. President, board members, I will just say that this is setting a budget or a number. The real hard numbers you're going to see, which we will try and get you sooner than later. As soon as we get them, you'll have them some additional time to look at. But they will be the hard budget numbers, the schedule, and the actual pay-as-you-go analysis for the note. So again, tonight, all we're setting is the maximum amount of money that could be spent in this district and the actual district outline.
Well, you could have done that with less than 2,000 pages, right?
So, Mr. President, I do not make the statutory rules. I will say and the way it's been working is, so Canterbury paid their $12,000 twice now for 2 applications they paid back before I was here, and they just paid again recently. And they also have to reimburse the cities for the cost of the LHB studies. So they reimbursed the city back in 2015, and they will reimburse us. I think the update was $7,000 or $8,000. They'll have to reimburse us for that. So they're kind of on the path that they need at least to know what the maximum is in the district set up, because I would say they're going to have to spend several $100,000 to actually get the numbers to you and to the county so that we can have a dialogue with the county, with the administrator and the county administrator to figure out what the numbers are going to be as far as what the county shares, because by statute, they could actually take the entire TIF. They would have to prove what they would need it for, but the city engineer has been working very closely they've just hired a new traffic consultant who's been working with Mr. Lillehog on where we're going to be. We're hopefully in 30 days going to have at least an outline of the improvements outside of district are required. We'll then meet with the county. We'll come up with some numbers. We'll come back to you with a hard budget, but we need to know, you all need to know the ceiling is at 33 million. And what the district looks like. We'll go back, I think, to address the gentleman's question. We're going to have to do some improvements to Eagle Creek. Since I've been here before this project ever was talked about, it was talked about doing some improvements at that intersection. 83, we'll move forward with or without Canterbury. I think we need to have the discussion in the county. What does that really mean?
I guess I want to be clear on record that not only did we receive a letter from Scott County, but I also got a phone call from county commissioners prior to this meeting, concerned that they don't want to be left out of the needs that are being driven by this project. So,
Yes, Mr. President, we're well aware of that, and we will have to do a traffic analysis. We'll have to agree on what that impact is. I mean, right now, they currently have a project programmed in 2021 for Highway 83 that has a significant local but also significant federal contribution. I think the discussion will be, you all have already budgeted a small amount of money that was agreed on for that. What additional monies are needed based on the current Canterbury plan and that traffic impact analysis? I've had some discussions with the county staff that Barronshire, has come up as a big issue because there's a lot of industrial that now faces that. So you'll see Skinnell Properties is going to come in with a project, and they have difficulty accessing Fourth for the project they're proposing. They already have an agreement in concept with Canterbury for an access to what's currently a private street, which is Barronshire. If that gets put through properly, that'll take some of the traffic off of Fourth Street and put it to a new signal on an industrial route. That was never counted in the county's number. We understand that. That will probably require a new $300,000 or $400,000 signal and concrete improvements there. But all of that will be figured in the traffic study and negotiated before we get here.
Yep, and just, when we did the original concept on this, and the EAW for the original concept, that EAW comments came back saying, we need to have a transportation analysis, and it wasn't done. So, Mr. Whiting.
Right, and I think we're not having that discussion tonight. We don't have the traffic study. We haven't negotiated with the county, and I think there's definitely some room to work with that because
We have.
I have some concerns there. But tonight, we're just establishing the district.
Yep.
We're establishing the maximum amount. You know, I think there's different ways to pay for these roads. I think to develop this property, it's gonna need those roads done. We can do it with a TIF plan, we can do it with bonding, we could do it as part of our capital improvement plan, but, you know, the 33 million, you know, the 80 million with the interest is the max. You know, the costs are unknown at this point. We don't know. We don't have that traffic study. We gotta work on that. But the improvements to, you know, Valley Industrial Drive, connecting that, or which will end up being Barronshire
Yep.
or Shenandoah, or, they're gonna be of value to the entire community. They're gonna relieve some traffic issues. The development will cause some traffic issues, but we don't know all the details there. We talked about the TIFs. Mr. Reynolds gave us some information on a 10-year study from the state auditors, and what caught my eye on that was 50% of the TIFs are decertified early. So it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to go out 25 years.
Half.
It could be 24 and a half, but it could also be 12 or 10. We don't know. Typically,
Highly unlikely it'll be 12,
well,
but.
I'm just
it could-
saying.
It could be 15 or 17.
You know, we've talked about developing restaurants and hotels and the destination spots that Randy and Canterbury are talking about in this plan are going to change this community. I think it's great. I'm excited to see this go through. We talked about the Gateway, and it's a public-private partnership that's moving this forward. And the development we've talked about is the highest and best use for this area, and will bring back as much of development in the past. Now, I think in the past when we discussed this, so we've been discussing this, I think you said since 2014, or variations of plans and things. I thought it was an 8 to 9 year TIF, but that would be an economic development TIF, so I may have misspoke in the past, but it is a 25-year plan. I think it's gonna be great for our community, and I would move, offer a resolution number E 2018-003, which creates a new redevelopment TIF district for a 25-year time frame for the area consisting largely of Canterbury.
Mr. Mars.
I'll second that motion for further discussion.
Mr. Luce, you had your hand up.
Yeah, they're talking about a big roundabout on Barronshire over towards 83. That's going to be a little tricky for a tractor trailer to be using that for an industrial route. I mean, if they take out the roundabout, that would make more sense, but, you know, I'm just pointing it out. And then you said the county has the ability to attach the whole portion of 83?
Mr. President and board members, the statute allows the county, if they do not currently have a project in their capital improvement plan, to take additional funds necessary to cover impacts of a TIF project.
I thought they already had 83 on their plan.
Oh,
They do. However, I think we need to have a discussion with them. Did their 83 plan include as much development as you see before us? And I think the city engineer is working very closely with Canterbury's traffic engineer to make sure that the right roads are designed and built. Your comment on Barronshire, Canterbury is not a big fan of roundabouts either, and so they see that as a major relief valve for not only Canterbury, but the entire industrial area. So people coming down Shenandoah, if they want to get to 83, can just make a turn there. So one of the things they're looking at is minimizing roundabouts in areas where you have tractor-trailer traffic. However, Shenandoah, as it comes through, we probably want to discourage tractor-trailers driving through that area because it's going to be a pretty dense area. And so you probably will see in the traffic analysis at least some roundabouts there.
Go ahead.
And just to follow up, the 33 million maximum that we're voting on or going to vote on has already been calculated by Springstead that this will be able to be repaid with this taxing district. So it's not like it's a number that's way beyond what they can handle. It's
That's-
within the scope.
And that's contingent on everything that you're seeing on the picture actually getting built.
Correct. I
Okay?
understand that.
Mr. Myers?
Thank you. I took a call from our county commissioner today too as well. And those numbers need to be negotiated with city staff. I understand the traffic study in the EAW. That is being worked on. I think this is a process of many steps. The step tonight is approving the map and also the calculation that this development under TIF could generate $33 million. But as I asked Tom, Mr. Dunaway, earlier, that with the map and the calculations, without a master development agreement, we have nothing. And the details that we all want and need, and the public, will be in the master development agreement. When that all gets hammered out, all the pieces come together, the key document, which will be another vote at a later date, will be in the master development. It will detail what exactly what we're spending on, some harder cost estimates, who pays what, all those questions about the traffic analysis and all that. So really, this is just the outline of the outline, the map, and can this development support this amount, and if it builds out. So I think that while every vote is very important, and I don't want to slight that, today is just a framework. And of course, we want Canterbury to be successful. A successful Canterbury means a successful community. Successful community means we're thriving. And I look forward to we think this is a big document here about the condition of the buildings. I believe the master development agreement will be much bigger than this.
The thing that,
Don't encourage it.
one of the things that I struggle with internally is I take an area of town, and I'm going to use Southbridge as an example, where you have the housing component, the retail component, the restaurants, the commercial. You have everything that you're doing in this project. The difference is this one is using tax dollars to fund it, and that one did not. Now, why was that one successful? And
I
there's a
think
lot
that-
of
yeah.
different things with that development. The association is paying for all of the road maintenance and trees and grass clippings along the roads and stuff, indefinitely. So that's the internal struggle I have. How come some areas can do it and some areas can't? And,
I think Mr. President and board members, Mr. Sampson kind of distilled it this is not a greenfield. I mean, if you saw the drawing he had, the road now probably will go through even more barns. That's basically, they're gonna have to demolish and clean up those areas. Those are typically TIF costs, but we've agreed, we're only spending TIF money on public infrastructure. So they've agreed that $20 to $30 million that they have to clear that whole corner out and build all new barns to the rear is gonna be on them. I think the other big difference is he could just go and build a bunch of warehouses and some other stuff here. I think we're looking at what's the biggest impact for the community. We have had a major corporate user that has recently looked at this property, and the first thing their CEO said is, it looks like a prison, and I'm not gonna lose my job by moving us to a prison. So I think they want to see that there is a path forward for them, if they're going to invest 50 or 60 million dollars in that property, that public roads and infrastructure will happen. Because it's a big nut for them to go back to their board to build a new headquarters. And so I think the difference is greenfield development, and we're seeing it, is a lot easier than redevelopment. And that's why the state set up this statute to make it happen.
Mr. Myers and then Mr. Luce.
I think, President Lehman, that concept about Southbridge, which was 20-plus years ago, that the Shakopee 500 group, you know, developed housing, they didn't ask for TIF, but the housing portion developed very rapidly. They had a master agreement, they have a commercial portion of it. 15 years ago, we had Dean's Lake that wanted some tax increment financing, and that worked out very well for our community. I think a little over $1 million. I always say the value of that property, including the housing, is $45 million. I think I'm short. I think that said wow in our community, and now we look at something that's 10 times as big, about a piece of property that's been in our community for over 30 years that hasn't developed. And as we saw those maps before, where Canterbury was kind of out in the middle of nowhere back when our community was about 8,000 people, and now the infill development, with or without assistance, but Canterbury itself has not developed without all that. So, of course, this is full of challenges, but I think it's also full of enormous opportunities. And again, I think the big question here is what's in the development agreement, and we don't have that. And you've asked questions, I have questions, the traffic study, the impact, the cost, the hard cost, what it goes to, you know, those, the county's portion, school sign-off, district sign-off, all those things come together in that agreement, and we don't have that in front of us today. To get there, we need to take this step, which is just the framework.
Mr. Lewis.
Yeah, we gotta remember back that, you know, Canterbury, changed hands a number of years ago. And, you know, that had a stigma for a number of years that it wasn't a viable enterprise. So a lot of companies don't wanna build around that, because if the place goes down, they're gonna be across the road from a defunct horse track. Who wants that? You know, these guys are doing a good job, they're running it, they're, if you look at their paperwork for their audit for 2016, which I pulled up on the internet, they're doing pretty good. They're not doing fantastic, but they're doing way better than the previous owners were. And, you know, now it's a viable property, so they have a chance to have other companies want to be around them. As far as the road costs for Southbridge, I'd be curious if staff could put something together for us so that we could see. You know, I have the same concern you have of, you know, some roads getting paid for by private and some by TIF. I would like to see what the roads cost out in Southbridge. If they were equal to 20 million, I would say we've got a fairly even trade-off.
A lot of time has passed between then and now.
Yeah, but that's
what was a lot
what it
cheaper.
cost them then. You know, the present cost is always what it has to be. I mean, you can't back up. And the other one is the master development plan. I would sure hope that we can get that at least a week, if not longer, before we have to make a decision on it. I mean, this was a lot of reading and a lot of studying for over a weekend. I mean, if you really wanted to go through all of it, which I tried my best to do, it took most of the weekend. I don't know how you did it in one day, but.
Yeah, well, I did it in 2 days.
No.
Any other discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, myself, passes 4-1. 4F, enter into a lease with Doggy Doos. Mr. Kersky.
Mr. President, board members, this is a short-term lease. Since we'll be acquiring the property, this matches the current lease they have. They're paying $3,000 a month plus about another $1,000 a month in property taxes. So this will get them through to get their new building built and relocated. And put some money back into the EDA.
That building has $12,000 a year in property taxes?
Yes.
Mr. President,
Mr. Myers?
I'll offer resolution E 2018-007.
Second. Ms. Mokel? Mr. Luce?
Is there some reason that is this a hard and fast date that we have to close? I mean, I don't like the city being in the rental business. I mean, there's just too many pitfalls.
Mr. President, nor do we, but I think that this mirrors, we worked with Kennedy and Graven, this is a pretty ironclad lease. Right now, they pay for everything, they'll pay for everything in this. They have to indemnify the city and the EDA. They're paying the same as they are currently. So, and it's a short-term lease, it expires in September.
And if I remember right, somewhere in the purchase agreement on the property by 69 for Doggy Doos, they had a 6-month window to start construction,
Yes.
and this has got a 6-month window of lease. So the two are
Matches up.
kind of
Keep 'em viable.
corresponding. Any other questions? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Item number 5, reports EDA bill list. Mr. Myers?
Make a motion to approve the EDA bill list with, for $412,733.85, and a note that a pass-through money, which is not ours, that we're just passing through, equals $400,000 even of that
That
for Anchor
was
Glass.
the state grant dollars to Anchor Glass for improvement on their blast furnace thing.
Right, exactly.
Okay? Do we need to adopt this, or is this just for our information?
We need to adopt.
It needs to be adopted.
Is there a motion to, Mr. Myers made that motion? Second?
Second.
Seconded and tied by the two. I will go with Mr. Luce, as he's listed less on my little sheet here. Myers. Any other questions? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes 5-0. Motion to adjourn to April 3rd would be in order.
Motion to adjourn to Tuesday, April 3rd, 2018 at 7 PM.
Motion by Ms. Mokel, second by Mr. Luce. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. We are adjourned.
We'll reconvene the City of Shakopee City Council meeting for March 6, 2018. And we're on to general business. 10A1, resolution approving a tax increment finance tax plan for District 18, Project 1. Counselor Whiting?
Make a resolution, or make a motion to approve the resolution number 2018-027, approving a tax increment financing redevelopment district number 18 and modifying the redevelopment plan for the Minnesota River Valley Housing and Redevelopment Project number 1.
Counselor Mokel, second.
I will second, and also agree that this project is very much looking forward to. It's the first step, and then we will get that master document back.
All right, motion on the table with a second. Further discussion. This is the exact same vote as we took in the EDA. Further discussion? Further discussion? All in favor, say aye. Aye. Those opposed?
Aye.
Motion passes 4-1. Thank you. 10A2, resolution for an inter-fund loan to advance for certain costs connected with the proposed tax increment finance district. Mr. Kursky,
Mr. Mayor and council members, this is the exact same resolution you passed in the EDA. This just allows Darren and I to work together on transferring money as we move back and forth.
and this is just so we can capture those funds and,
Yes, sir, and get repaid.
Does it need a resolution number?
Counselor Mokel?
I'll make a motion to approve resolution number R 2018-00, a resolution authorizing an interfund loan for advance of certain costs in connection with proposed tax increment financing district.
That resolution number is R2018 TAC 011.
Did I not say that right?
All right, so in the motion with R2018-011.
Yes, sir.
I have a motion. Second by Counselor Whiting. Further discussion? Discussion? All in favor, say aye. Aye. Those opposed?
Aye.
Motion passes 4-1. Thank you very much. Next up, we have the city bill list for everybody's preview. And then we'll move to liaison and administration. Counselor Lehman?
I attended the school district board meeting, and highlights you probably all saw in the paper, but they had an agreement on their labor contract. The teachers didn't get a whole lot recognizing the situation the school district's in, and the school district's gonna make some concessions on flexibility on some of the details of their daily job, so it was kind of nice to see that the two entities actually, working together for the best interest of the community, so hats off to the teachers for doing that. We appreciate everything you do. They had an overview of their construction on the high school, and a lot of change orders, some of them pretty big, and I had the opportunity to talk to their construction manager person to try to get a better understanding, because some of them were from previous change orders, and it was really kind of confusing until you really break it down. Mr. McBroom was in the audience sitting right behind me, so the three of us actually went over it. And their total dollar of their contingency is under, use of contingency, if I'm understanding this correct, is less than 2%. At least that's what I'm being told, which was pretty surprising for a project of that size. So give you an update on that. There's a lot of talk of different things that they're looking at considering doing for cost savings and some structuring stuff, but nothing cast in stone at this point. A lot of good discussion. Thursday is 169 quarter, and I'll be going to that one, so.
Excellent. I do not have a mayor's report. I've been doing lots of reading lately.
Starting Friday, right?
Counselor Whiting?
I had the MVTA meeting last week where we had the Operator of the Year awards. We had some great employees. Something I didn't realize is that they have sub-drivers, which can basically jump in and take over any route, and they're highly prized employees, so I want to thank all of them, and several awards were given out, so it was nice meeting.
I wonder how they memorize all these different routes.
Well, that's what I was thinking,
They have a map in the cab.
Oh, they do have help, yeah.
Thank you. Counselor Mokel?
I did not have any reports for this week.
Thank you. Our administrator report.
Nothing here, sir.
Excellent. No other business before this board? Counselor Whiting?
Make a motion to adjourn to March 20th, 2018 at 7 p.m.
I have a motion.
Second.
Second by Counselor Lehman. Further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed? Motion carries. We are adjourned at 9:34. Thank you all.